Here, we will talk through how to locate the formative assessment of a skill within a unit or lesson. Our goal in this video is to help you answer these two questions. How do I identify where the formative assessment falls in the lesson or unit? And what makes an effective formative assessment? We're going to do this using a lesson that you've already read through from Fish Tank, 5th grade, Unit 2, Lesson 3, where students are reading The Breadwinner. We're going to start by addressing this first question. How do I locate where the formative assessment is within the lesson or unit? And it's important to remember that an ELA lesson may have the formative assessment in the lesson, or it may be in a subsequent lesson. This is because some standards cannot be fully addressed in the scope of one lesson and must be covered in multiple. So to figure this out, it's helpful to zoom out and orient yourself to the lesson and the unit. Here are all of the lessons in Unit 2 that address the same standard, 5.rl.3. We are talking about Lesson 3, analyze how the author characterizes Pravana and how the author develops characterization. The summative assessment will be the cold read assessment provided by the curriculum, and it will come here after Lesson 13. The curriculum does not give guidance on where this should fall, but we've chosen to have it here because students will have covered all of the standards on the assessment at this point, and there will be lessons after the cold read to do any remediation. So for this standard, there are 2 additional lessons after Lesson 13 that cover 5.rl, rl.5.3. So this tells us that the formative is going to fall somewhere between Lesson 3, where we are now, and Lesson 13, where they have the summative assessment. When we look ahead to the lessons that follow Lesson 3, we can see that in Lesson 4, they have to analyze how Pravana, Mother, and Noria respond to Father's disappearance, and how their responses help build a deeper understanding of their character. So they are kind of comparing and analyzing multiple characters in the next lesson. So this tells us that if students are unclear on how to analyze one character in Lesson 3, they're going to be really confused in Lesson 4 when they have to apply this skill to multiple characters. So this tells me that having a formative assessment in Lesson 3 is going to be really important so that I can do any remediation or any addressing of misconceptions in Lesson 4 before they dive into analyzing multiple characters. Now that we know Lesson 3 needs a formative assessment, we can look to the lesson to see what is provided and whether or not it will need to be modified. In order to determine if, when reviewing a formative assessment, we need to consider how students are going to show mastery at the end of the year and the unit and throughout the unit. This is going to help us to see if there are modifications that we need to make. In addition, we need to consider what components an effective ELA assessment has. And we know that some of these criteria are in making sure it's a new read, so a text that hasn't been read by students before. We want to make sure it's done completely individually, that it's aligned to the teach the skill key points, and that there's an exemplar response and grading criteria so that the assessment is equitable. So let's take a look. For this standard, RL.5.3, here we have 2 assessment items that assess the standard. The first one is from Missouri Map and the other is from Park. And in both instances, students have to read a text independently before answering these questions. In the map example, students are going to have to assign a trait to a character in Part A and then support that conclusion with a sentence in Part B. In the Park example, the students are given the trait. They're determined to succeed, and they need to explain how the author showed this in Part A and then again support it in Part B. Now we can look at the summative assessment. Again, this is the cold read provided by the curriculum. So students are going to read a related text, a completely different text that will be related to the breadwinner that they've been reading. And then after they read it independently, they're going to answer this question independently. And you can see that in part A, they have to assign traits to 2 characters. And then in part B, they need to select evidence that supports their conclusion. So, now that we know how students will be asked to show their mastery of the standard, we can look to what's already in the curriculum to see if it aligns with what we've seen in the lesson, the end of year, and summative assessments, and decide if we need to modify. So here we have a possible formative assessment that's within the lesson. This is the exit ticket, and it's provided by the curriculum, and you can see it's a similar format. It's got part A and part B. Part A is asking students to compare how Nori and Parvana reacted differently by selecting text evidence. And then in part B, they have to explain why the reactions are different and are provided with explanations of their character traits. So we see that the part A, part B format somewhat aligns with how they'll be assessed at the end of the year and the summative assessments, but it's asking them to apply this skill in order to compare characters, which is not what students have practiced in the lesson. The only thing they've practiced in the lesson is analyzing one character, particularly Parvana. In addition, the text was read as a class and in partners, so it's not a new read. The lesson also provides this, the target task. So this could be a possible formative assessment in the lesson. And it's asking them to respond to, again, the same chapter, the same text they've read together as a class and in partners. So we know it's not a new read. And then it's having them write a written response to analyze Parvana. We know from looking at the lesson that students have worked together throughout the lesson to describe Parvana and to use evidence to support the traits they assign her. If this was given as for a formative assessment, it would be really tough to decipher what students know on their own versus what they remember from working with their partner or from a class discussion. And then the last thing I'll say is that the format doesn't really align with how we know students are going to be assessed in the unit and at the end of the year. So let's take a look. Here we have the modified formative assessment for this lesson. I'd like you to pause the video here in order to review it. And as you're reviewing, consider what was done to modify it and why is it effective. After you've read the exit ticket, you can return to Google Class to respond to that question. What was it done to modify it and why is it effective?